Let's imagine there is a pond. You have two solutions, A and B. A will reduce the contamination in the pond from 5% to 2%, while B will reduce the contamination from 2% to 0%. So without giving much thought, which solution will you prefer? I guess most of you have choose solution B over A because solution B is reducing the contamination from 2% to 0%. In that case, you are all wrong. Why? Look at the difference between the percentage. For solution A, it is reducing the contamination by 3%, while solution B is reducing the contamination only by 2%. This example shows we don't really have idea of probability and we tend to underestimate risk. Taking this analogy, many organizations don't do AML CFT audit of their AML CFT compliance program. They think that their compliance program is sufficient, which is again underestimating risk. You may be wondering, is AML safety even worth considering? Well, these news headlines might say otherwise. In 2023, 11 banks in UAE were fined USD 12.5 million for poor money laundering and terrorism funding controls. Deutsche Bank AG fined $1.9 million for poor AML internal controls. Standard Chartered Trust was fined $194,000 penalties related to lapses in customer onboarding, client due diligence, risk evaluation practices and systems. Bank of China UK was fined 2.3 million for facilitating terrorism financing. Payoneer was levied fine of 1.4 million for sanction violation. These are only just few examples. And you can be sure that in almost 90% of these fines were imposed because of the loopholes in these organization AML safety programs and procedures, which could have been prevented had these organization conducted AML safety audit in time. So what is AML safety audit? This is the definition given by the FATF. In general, AML safety audit is a dynamic, risk-based, independent oversight process that allows institutions to understand the effectiveness of AML safety controls. This includes determining whether the organization is compliant with applicable financial crime laws, regulation, and internal policies and procedures. In summary, AML safety auditor will perform following activities. They perform testing to assess the design and effectiveness of controls aimed at mitigating AML safety risk. They identify and escalate control weakness to senior business and compliance management. They coordinate with compliance and business groups to develop corrective action plans where control gaps are identified. They ensure that corrective actions have been implemented sustainably. But these are not exhaustive list. There are a lot of supporting tasks that auditors need to perform along with these larger tasks. Now let's discuss why AML safety audit is different from other types of audit like financial audit, and why this audit should be performed by the auditor with special AML safety qualification. Most of the audit professionals are basically a historian who provides an opinion on the truth and fairness of a set of financial statements covering a period of time in the past. The auditing and independent testing of money laundering and terrorism financing is very different. There is requirement to look at every business process with customer transaction, whereas the financial statements are required to be materially correct. In the area of anti-money laundering, there is almost zero tolerance for error. In AML safety audit, auditors should put a greater emphasis on the design of effective controls in order to prevent and detect potential money laundering and terrorism financing events in the future. I want to stress that I am not against certified public accountants, but audit teams should have an AML safety expert with the certification like CAMS audit or equivalent. When audit is performed by anybody, it can put a company at the risk. That is, when regulators come in to look at the work effectiveness, they will find flaws in the reports, therefore perceive the whole organization to be weak on AML. Organizations need to hire subject matter expertise, not just accountants or career auditors, and make sure that audit team includes people who have been there and done that. An auditor is a last line of defense in context of risk management, three lines of defense. Ultimately, if auditor fails as the last line of defense, meaning unable to detect loopholes in AML safety program, the financial institution can be exposed to enforcement action, including their executives. Now you may be asking yourself, my organization has an internal audit or compliance department who does the testing of AML safety program. So will that be enough? Well, it depends. Compliance testing can be defined as a periodic, independent and objective assessment of compliance related process and controls. The aim of compliance testing is to assess whether the elements, process and controls of compliance program are designed appropriately and are operating as designed. It is always good to have some independent body reviewing AML safety program of your organization frequently, but it comes with its own share of weaknesses. Despite the entire regulatory framework, compliance monitoring and testing adopted in many banks is a still tick box or checklist approach. It is performed periodically or repetitively without consideration of the big picture of risk and with no forward-looking issues being raised. This myopic approach by many banks results in failure to adequately assess the control framework and hence run the big risk of regulatory censure or hefty fines. In several instances, compliance monitoring and testing is embedded in business as usual with no or limited authority or powers to influence the business action regarding the control framework. This ultimately leads to a situation where compliance testing reports are not taken very seriously. Often, the senior management behaves in an intimidating way towards the compliance testing staff. In some power structures, the situation is so worse that one bad word can end a compliance testing officer's career. There are also cases of compliance officers in some of the biggest banks experience intimidation by business management to downplay or suppress results of their compliance testing or other compliance identified issues. Next, you are going to learn a very important concept, that is what you should expect from an AML safety audit. This will help you in drafting request for proposal for any kind of AML safety audit. First, A good AML safety auditor will understand nature of business or the salient feature of that organization. For example, does that institution have a very high cash intensive customer base? Does it send and receive large volumes of international fund transfers? Are there any imminent changes impacting AML risk, such as branching into new market or developing new products or service line? What types of AML problem areas have been identified in a previous examinations? AML auditors have a very good communication skills. They know that client and other stakeholders need their help whether they want it or not. They really try to understand their needs and devise audit scope and objectives accordingly. They don't have a gotcha attitude but really want to try to add value to the organization by identifying AML weaknesses. AML auditors will always look at AML governance. It is not a rocket science that without a strong culture of compliance coming from the board and the senior management, in other words, tone at the top, there is a likelihood of failure by control function no matter how the second line of defense try to mitigate risk. Throwing all the money in the world into the controls without culture is a waste. Auditors will review risk assessment of your organization. If the organization has not performed any kind of AML safety risk assessment, they will perform risk assessment by themselves and identify risky areas. Such areas could include organization strategy, alignment of organization policy and procedure with applicable regulatory framework, customer onboarding and due diligence procedures, transaction monitoring systems and procedures. Hence, a risk-based approach should be adopted to determine the areas that should be incorporated into the scope and the design of these independent AML audits. Auditors will have a clarity in audit scope and what methodology to be applied during audit, like assessing the policies and procedures to confirm that the design of controls is appropriate and aligned with the regulatory requirements and expectation as well as industry best practices. Reviewing organizations' pre-existing compliance risk assessment and other self-assessment. Testing the effectiveness of controls through a sampling approach like reviewing account opening and closing procedures, process of filing suspicious activity reports, AML training, and performing risk-based testing over key controls to evaluate their effectiveness. The resulting risk profile of these areas will drive the extent of testing coverage and helps auditor to formulate audit plan. Audit plan can be defined as a roadmap of potential testing areas or units that are each assessed and risk rated through the combination of qualitative and quantitative analysis. The universe should cover all relevant financial crime risk and other areas that may warrant potential testing coverage. Auditors will provide resumes or credentials of the individuals who will be actually be on site performing the work. It is recommended that they possess certification like CAMS or CAMS audit or some kind of certification related to anti-money laundering. Auditor proficiency in respective legal and regulated framework is also necessary. However, a successful auditor will also possess industry-specific experience and a high level of commitment to the process. They should be knowledgeable and remain updated about new topics, trends, and requirements of anti-money laundering. Auditors will have embraced new technology like data analytics, which help them to identify more quickly the root causes of compliance shortfalls and help them to deploy resources to correct issues that can present the greatest risk. Auditor will provide reasonable time and cost based on the scope of assignment by explaining their logistical as well as manpower requirement. This should be decided before starting AML audit. Auditor will not only raise issues but also provide practicable and effective solution. They will recommend what course of action should be taken to protect organization from any kind of AML safety risk. During the review, auditor must critically challenge the entire AML program. One of the most important components of the independent review process is reporting all observations to the compliance officer so that officer can develop a remediation plan. The compliance officer should communicate the critical observation to senior management and track the remediation progress. If you are able to consider all those points as discussed, you will be able to select a best AML safety auditor for your organization. Good auditor not only helps to improve your AML safety program but also prevents your organization to suffer from any regulatory fines and penalties, which in turn reduces your reputation, operation, financial and legal risk. Thank you for your time and have a nice day. Finally, make a right choice and call us for free consultancy at We are risk simplifiers. Our expertise includes AML safety risk assessment, AML safety audit, and any other matters related to AML safety to help you manage AML safety risk of your organization easily and at a reasonable cost. Thank you for your time and have a nice day.